Conquest raised many new questions. What, for example, would be the fate of the millions of non-whites now living under American sovereignty? Were the new territories colonies? Could they become states? Were they protected by the U.S. Constitution? The United States would come up with different answers for its new possessions. In the late 19th century, Germany, Italy, and Japan joined Europe's older empires in the rush for overseas possessions. European nations carved up large sections of Africa. England and Germany pushed for economic control over many Latin American nations, while France took over large sections of Indochina. By 1914, more than 80% of the world's land was under European control. Believing that Americans were among the great fighting races of the world, Theodore Roosevelt and other expansionists wanted the United States to keep its newly won territories as part of an American world empire. Many American policymakers were excited about the foothold that the Philippines gave the United States in the commerce of Asia. In order to gain access to the huge Chinese markets, Secretary of State John Hay called for an open-door policy in which European nations would agree to the right of free trade for all nations wanting to do business in China and pledge to respect Chinese independence. At first, President McKinley was unsure about what to do with the Philippines, but after weighing all of the options, finally made his decision.
Take them all and educate the Filipinos, and uplift and civilize and Christianize them, and by God's grace do the very best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ died.
These sounded like noble sentiments, but what did the Filipinos think of all of this? Filipino leader Emilio Aguinaldo insisted on his nation's independence and led an armed resistance against the Americans that would continue for 3 years and cost more than 4,000 American and more than 200,000 Filipinos' lives. Back home, opposition to the war grew quickly. The Anti-Imperialist League vigorously opposed the war. Their members included such prominent Americans as former Presidents Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland, industrialist Andrew Carnegie, and writer Mark Twain. Senator George F. Hoare of Massachusetts denounced the United States for descending from the ancient path of Republican liberty which the Founding Fathers trod down into the modern swamp and cesspool of imperialism.
Imperialism is defined generally as the activities of one society to control the affairs of another. Generally, it can be accompanied by colonialism, actual physical occupation of another society, but it doesn't have to be. It can be simply sufficient political power or sufficient economic power, and often cultural influence, so much that the imperial society has an overweening, a dominant say in what goes on in the other society.
As the Filipino-American War dragged on, atrocities committed by both sides turned the fighting vicious. American troops tortured and killed prisoners, slaughtered whole villages, and destroyed their crops in order to starve the Filipinos into submission. Once the Filipino War ended in 1902, the U.S. government and American missionaries worked to improve the lives of Filipinos, constructing schools and hospitals, and setting up a civilian government. The United States would not grant the Filipinos their independence until after the Second World War.